It is my pleasure tonight to introduce our keynote speaker. Michelle Zehr has been a U.S. Marine, a musician, a mechanic, a college instructor. She successfully completed the AT through hike in 2008, along with picking up the trail name Certain. She is the creator of WE2, which stands for Women's Experiential Empowerment. She is a featured columnist in Unite Virginia magazine, a self-defense instructor, and is the director of Camp Mabon, which is a nature-based retreat for survivors of sexual violence. In addition, Michelle is the head dame for the Central Virginia Trail Dames chapter and a member of the Trail Dames Board of Directors. Please help me welcome our keynote speaker, Michelle Zehr.
Thank you. Wow. Well, hi everybody. Are we having a good time at the Trail Dames Summit? Yeah, it's every year it gets better and better, and it's a real privilege to be here. I was seriously, when I was asked to be the keynote speaker, it is not a joke. You can ask Karen, my partner. I was jumping up and down like a little child on Christmas morning because I'm like, yes, this is like, you all are my people. You're my people. You're my tribe. So there's, to me, no greater honor than to have an invitation to speak with you tonight. How many of you read this book, Women Who Run with the Wolves? Okay, so in my opinion, every woman needs to read this book, okay? This is how thick it is, so it's not like we're gonna read it in an afternoon. But what I want, it's a book, it's myths and stories about wild women. And if you notice on the subtitle, it says, Contacting the Power of the Wild Woman. And when she says wild woman, that's capitalized, that's a proper noun, all right? We're not talking, whatever our culture defines as wild, but, so who is this wild woman? And if at any point somebody cannot hear me, just let me know, okay? Who is this wild woman? I would say she is the purest expression of the divine feminine that lives within every single woman on the planet. All of you, me, every woman everywhere. Her potential is limitless and is definitely not bound by the constraints of society. She is the epitome of nature, of the wild feminine that exists. There's a reason we call her Mother Nature, right? That's a feminine term to put on her. And what the author says is that once women have regained her, they will fight and fight hard to keep her for their creative lives. I can't read that far, oh my gosh. It really does happen when you hit over 40, your eyesight starts going. I'm going to read off my notes here so I can actually read this. Once women have regained her, they will fight and fight hard to keep her, for with her, their creative lives blossom, their relationships gain meaning and depth and health, their cycles of sexuality, creativity, work, and play are reestablished. They are no longer marks for the predations of others. They are entitled equally under the laws of nature to grow and to thrive. I don't know about y'all, but that sounds like a pretty awesome way to move through life as a woman. So before I launch into my talk tonight, I'd like to share my intention. I think intention is very important. And it's interesting because when I'm asked to speak, I don't just go and recycle something I've done before. I sit down, I get quiet, I ask the universe what wants to be shared. And that's what I did for this talk, especially this talk. And then I wait patiently for that message to come through. So I have a couple of intentions tonight. I want to take us all through a journey that is both my own personal journey and at the same time, it is the journey of every woman sitting in here. My intention is to give to each of you a piece of myself, my energy, and so that by the time I speak my final words tonight, the wild woman in all of you will either be awakened for the first time, or I know there's a lot of women in here who have already met her. My hope is that she will begin to more fully express herself through you. Now, there's a second part to my intention, and I'm going to be really, really honest here. I was afraid to mention this part of my intention. It made me uncomfortable. But if I'm uncomfortable with it, that's going to be the very place that I go first. So, it comes in the form of a call to action. And usually you mention calls to action at the end of a keynote speech, but I didn't feel like that was the right time to do this because I want you all to be empowered to make the choice that feels right to you, so you know from the very beginning of this evening, you have that choice. So here's what that call to action is. Every table should have a sheet like this at it. And it says, first and last name, email, mailing address. I want every single one of you to decide for yourselves. There's no expectation, there's no pressure. I am writing a book, excited to say, that's likely going to go deeper into what I'm going to speak about tonight. I have a book agent who believes in me. I have a publicist who believes in me. I have a publisher who wants to read a book proposal that I haven't even written yet. But here's the deal. For any of you who've ever tried to get published, if you don't have an audience, they're not going to take a chance on you. So the call to action is this. If by the end of this evening, you feel that what you've heard up here tonight needs to be heard by women in your lives and elsewhere, I would ask that you provide me with your name, your email, and your contact information. Because when I get my book proposal written, I want to walk to that publisher and say, I have a list of women right here that are ready to hear this message and wants to spread this message. Only your name will be shared. I will not share your personal information. Once the book is published, because I'm just going to assume that it's going to be, I will make sure you all know when it is available. If you choose to buy the book and you read it and the message still feels true to you, then I would ask that you gift it to at least 2 other women in your lives and share that message with them. And here's why. By doing so, I believe we can create a web of women, possibly throughout the world, who can get the message of what you're about to hear tonight, and that this group of women right here can be the catalyst for women everywhere to feel empowered and stand up and reclaim the wild woman within them. But it's your choice, okay? There's a second part to this call of action. Nobody knows about this until this very moment. I want to donate a portion of the proceeds of these book sales to the Trail Dames Foundation. I so completely believe in what Anna Huffmaker and the original 9 have created. And the Trail Dames Foundation exists to support Trail Dames. It does support, the summit a little bit, but it also is there to support women-centered causes, and especially women in crisis. And of course, that speaks to my heart because I work with survivors of sexual and domestic violence in my own work. Without Trail Dames, without the summit, none of this would be possible. I wouldn't be able to stand up here in front of you tonight and speak. So that is the call to action. It's totally your choice. No sweat off my back if it doesn't feel right. It's all good, okay? So, let's continue. Remembering, reclaiming, expressing, connecting with the wild woman in all of us is the premise of my entire talk tonight. So I'd like to begin by quoting the author of this amazing book. And this is what she says: "Wildlife and the wild woman are both endangered species. Over time, we have seen the feminine instinctive nature looted, driven back, and overbuilt. For long periods, it has been mismanaged, like the wildlife and the wild lands. For several thousand years, as soon and as often as we turn our backs, it is relegated to the poorest land in the psyche. The spiritual lands of wild woman have, throughout history, been plundered or burnt, dens bulldozed, and natural cycles forced into unnatural rhythms to please others. Wild woman has been so oppressed historically in our culture, not just our culture, but worldwide. And I think, personally, it's time for her to break free again. It's time. So I think the best place to start is here. What question could be so powerful that it could drive a woman with absolutely no experience? And when I say no experience, I had never been backpacking in my life. I didn't own any gear. I didn't even know what an outfitter was. I thought an outfitter had something to do with sailboats. Okay? That's an outrigger I've since learned. So back in 2005, I was living in Michigan, I was in graduate school, and I was studying social justice education and an emphasis in women's and gender studies. So I was learning all about the ways that oppression and violence functions in society. And having personally grown up in a violent home, I learned what Clarissa, the author of this book, really meant when she said that our natural cycles have been forced into unnatural rhythms to please others. You know, we are animals. And if there's anything our animal instincts are going to do for us, they will keep us safe, even if it means instructing us to ignore our own needs or our own gifts or our power, just for the sake of staying safe and pleasing other people who we perceive to be more powerful than us. And there came this moment when I really started to begin to comprehend how all this was working in society, and how violence against women and oppression of women had become institutionalized in our culture, and to the point that it's so very much woven through the fabric of our society that it's become normal. And we don't even notice it anymore. The little things. We notice the big things, but we don't notice the little ways in which this operates in our culture. Well, this degree program, as I often joke, was my first form of therapy, opened my eyes in a really big way. My entire perspective of who I was as a woman, the way I move through the world, and the way I see women everywhere shifted radically. And when I had this realization, I hit this wall within myself. And there was one word written on this wall: powerlessness. I came face to face with my own powerlessness as a woman. And I couldn't quite figure out how that was possible, because, you know, I'm a former United States Marine. No one's gonna mess with me. No way. I'm not powerless. So surely this powerlessness thing did not apply to me. And I just was like, how did this happen without me even noticing it? How did this happen? How could I not have even realized that somehow I had internalized powerlessness as a woman? So I could stand up here and just talk about it, but I'm going to choose to take us on a little journey here. I'm going to attempt to let you all feel what I felt. And, you know, it's okay if it's intense. I'll be here to talk afterwards if you need to talk. Yeah, common room, there'll be wine. So there's one rule and one rule only as I take you on this journey tonight. I want you to get out of here, and I want you to start paying attention to what is happening from the neck down in your bodies. Wild woman does not talk to us in words and sentences. She talks to us through sensations, through feelings, through emotions, through energy in the body, okay? And I'll be checking in with you, saying, how do you feel in your body right now, okay? So we're gonna play a little game here. Where's all my trivia history people? I am so bad at history. What do we know about Thomas Edison? electricity. I mean, this dude did a lot, right? He invented the motion picture, electric light bulb. You know, he hooked up with Ford and helped with the whole assembly line thing, right? So a pretty important figure in history. Right, telephone testing. But in 1912, he was interviewed for Good Housekeeping magazine. We all know that magazine, right? Every woman has heard of this magazine. And he said, direct thought is not an attribute of femininity. In this, woman is now centuries behind men. Really? How about Ernest Hemingway? We all have heard of him, right? What do we know about him? Yeah. American novelist, you know, won the Pulitzer, pretty important figure in our history, country's history. 1943, he wrote this to his editor. If you leave a woman, though, you probably ought to shoot her. It would save enough trouble in the end, even if they hanged you. How does that make you feel?
Sorry, guys.
How about our beloved John Wayne? The Duke. Although I giggled, Marion Mitchell Morrison does not sound nearly as cool as John Wayne. He was asked about his views on the women's liberation movement. He said they have the right to work wherever they want to, as long as they have dinner ready when they get home. Sorry, ladies. How about Sean Connery? I know. And I also want to point something out here. We are all made up of shadow and light. We're all made up of good and bad. All right? So none of this tonight is coming from a judgmental place that these men are horrible people, right? They also are products of the context of the time that they've lived in. I'm not saying it's an excuse. I'm not saying that what they said is okay, but we're all made up of shadow and light. So I'm not here trying to bash men, and I'm not here trying to say you never should, watch a Sean Connery movie. I own Hunt for Red October. It's a great it's a great movie. So voted sexiest man of the century in 1999 at age 69.
Somebody's definitely better than me.
Considered Scotland's greatest living treasure. He was interviewed for Playboy. I don't think there's anything particularly wrong with hitting a woman. I think a man has to be slightly advanced ahead of the woman. And so he did an interview, television interview with Barbara Walters in 1987, and she promised she wasn't going to ask him about this, and she did anyway. And he defended his opinion. You can actually YouTube it. It's up online. What about Bobby Knight? Where are my sports fans here? Won a lot of college basketball games, Indiana University, nicknamed the General. He was quoted saying this in a 1988 interview with Connie Chung. I think if rape is inevitable, relax and enjoy it.
Oh, yes.
But maybe this is just an issue with men that are kind of in our time frame. So let's go way back, and we're talking 356 BC, before Christ, right? Alexander, anybody here not heard of Alexander the Great? Okay. All right. Yeah, don't raise your hand. I mean, his military tactics are still taught today in military schools. Ranked, and this is one of the most influential people in human history. Human history. Along with his teacher, Aristotle. Nature intended women to be our slaves. They are our property. But maybe he was just a jerk on his own right? Maybe he just was not informed. But let's see, what did his teacher have to say? Aristotle. Oh, it didn't just come from Alexander.
No, it came from his teacher.
Female is a female by virtue of a certain lack of qualities. We should regard the female nature as afflicted with a natural defectiveness. So, you see how this stuff might kind of possibly be handed off from generation to generation? And this was normal for their time, right? This was normal for their time. They didn't have a bunch of feminists out there picketing, whatever they did back in 384 BC. But it also is very striking that this was 2,400 years ago, and we are still hearing people with these opinions about women. Now, I'm not going to tell you who said this,
Donald Trump.
Because I'm not actually interested in getting into political conversations. I'm not interested in convincing anybody of anything. But it would be an individual who we probably will not hear a whole lot about after November, hopefully. How are y'all feeling your bodies right now? How's it feel? Where do you feel it? Tense in your chest. Sometimes you feel it in your gut. Doesn't feel very good, does it? Well, I got bad news for you. Because if you think this is where it ends, it doesn't. I'm going to read from here because this kind of came out in a way that I need to read it. Pink and purple are reserved for baby girls so that everyone else will know which words to use when talking to her. God forbid we call her strong and powerful. Nope. Far more appropriate to use words like sweet, nice, and of course sexy, because we all know there's nothing more sexy than a baby girl. The objectification of our bodies as women is cloaked behind the guise of harmless humor. In the beginning of our collective journey around all of this, the body hatred, the body shaming, the body judging is already waiting for us on the shelves of stores everywhere before we're even born. And let's not forget that before all things, a girl or woman must look like some fictional character from a movie where we have been told that we need to be sexy and attractive because how we look externally is directly proportional to our inherent value as women or girls. And we learn that it's far more acceptable to look good than it is to own our intellectual power and our gifts. But besides, who really needs it? Who really needs brains when the implication is that our futures are not our own, but rather it is implied that our future should focus on being somebody else's somebody, instead of being a future leader or inventor or healer or philosopher or teacher? Or how about a woman who simply takes up space in this world on her own terms? And when it comes to life's challenges, we are taught to look out there somewhere for someone to come and rescue us. Because after all, we are only meant to be the trusty sidekick to the real hero. We are the damsel in distress, powerless to save ourselves. But don't fool yourself for a minute. It's very clear where our place is. Where we do belong, where we are supposed to take up space, in the kitchen, caring for children, cleaning the house, and all the while we must look good while we do it. And I'm not saying there's anything wrong with doing any of it. They're necessary evils. I mean, they're necessary things we have to do in life, right? And actually, raising children is a sacred task. And there are women in this room right now who never had a choice but these roles in their lives. What I'm saying, though, is there's something radically wrong in 2016 when it is implied that this is automatically what women are supposed to do. And unfortunately, there are women in the world that still don't have a choice. And when we get a little bit older and start becoming curious about who we are in this world and in society, we have all of our country's major institutions lined up, waiting to reinforce what we've already learned about ourselves. There's our schools, justifying sexist dress codes so that our bodies will not distract those poor boys who just can't control themselves. You see, this is how the myth that boys will be boys is perpetuated. And this is one of the ways that we teach our young women and our girls that they are responsible for the actions and the choices and behaviors of other people. There's our churches, who have been the poster children of patriarchy. There's our own families, where the ability to keep a shameful secret in order to keep the peace is more important than our own sense of safety or bodily integrity. There's our government, who still endorses that old, worn-out excuse that boys will be boys. Wonder where they learned that from. And last but certainly not least, my favorite, the media. It has been waiting for us ever since it's existed to take us as women through an indoctrination process that will seal the deal and make us the women society deems worthy. Where, as young women, we will learn how to be charming, how to be a better kisser, and how to look leaner and taller, because remember, it doesn't matter that we are the very embodiment of the sacred feminine, as were our mothers and their mothers before them and before them. No, all we're taught is that we're already not good enough just as we are. And we will be inundated with advice about how to be a beach babe and find our hottest look, because as we all know, the first few decades of our lives is all about molding and shaping ourselves according to this mysterious external standard of perfection that is both impossible to meet and impossible to ignore. So we move into early adulthood, after our bodies begin to transform into the miraculously sacred vessels that can actually create, grow, and give birth to life. What is more sacred than that? But we ignore that because we still have to practice those slim down tricks that smart women swear by, and we learn to ignore the wisdom of our own body's hunger needs because we're so busy following some 250-word magazine article that promises us that we will finally feel worthy if we just eat those 20 yummy foods that will finally slim us down. And then we move into middle age, and it still doesn't stop. So let's hope we still remember that list of 20 yummy foods that we worship like the false gods of a lost religion. Because only then can we hope to resize our thighs or lose that belly fat. Because honestly, by the time you get into middle age, the last thing any of us wants is to end up single in our 40s. After all, what kind of woman must I be if I have not yet been asked to marry Mr. Right or Ms. Right? Clearly, I must be flawed. So how about instead of standing strong and embracing the divine feminine that lives within each of us, we put that aside and we learn how to cook like his mother, so he'll pop the question. These are all titles on these magazine covers if you can't see them. Or that we stay slim by fetching him beers, which according to experts, by the way, burns more calories than the treadmill.
Yeah.
Good housekeeping. This is good housekeeping. We all know this magazine. But most importantly, it is our job as women to understand where our place is. And when it comes to locating and using our own powerful voices, we are taught why we shouldn't say anything when our man needs to buy that new TV. Also on Good Housekeeping there. You know, they say silence is golden, but let me rephrase that to the way it was stated in the 16th century. Silence is a woman's best garment. And while we're at it, let's add to silence a message of invisibility. Because by the time we get to the stage of our lives marked by having spent at least half a century on this earth, the next expectation from society and instructions that we get is that we need to take up less and less space until we are no longer even visible. So we begin receiving those special magazines for older people. And they so generously let us know that yes, we still need to worry about how to look great at any age. And that this is the only place where we can find help regarding our beauty as women in our 50s, 60s, 70s, and beyond, because we are becoming less and less important, less and less relevant. Women in this age, these are our wise elders, and they should be treated and respected as such. But let's ignore the fact that by the time a woman reaches this stage of life, they have endured, put up with, overcome, survived, hurt, suffered, cried, raged, and truly earned the title of the wise old crone.
That would be me.
But hey, who has time when we're now worrying about all of the bad choices that we've already made from our lives finally catching up to us? Because once again, we are reminded that we're never going to be perfect enough, good enough, beautiful enough. We're simply never going to be enough, enough, enough. And I don't know if you all can see it very well. This is what I'm talking about right here, right now. And we wonder, and to me, nobody even finds it shocking that on a magazine meant for women over 50 years old, front and center on this magazine would be an article that's advertised that says this: inferiority complex, how to feel worthy and empowered. There's something wrong here. If we're just now addressing worth and empowerment for women at this age. And I think this is all summed up perfectly by Erica Jong, where she said, women are the only exploited group in the history to have been idealized into powerlessness. How y'all feeling in your bodies now? Some of you are really uncomfortable. I can see it. That's okay. It's totally fine to be uncomfortable. Some of you may be hearing this kind of a way of laying out the experiences of women for the very first time and are like, I'm not sure how I feel about it. That's okay. It's all allowed. It's all allowed. Wherever you're at, it's all allowed. But this feeling that you have that's uncomfortable or angry or sad, this feeling is our sacred wound that we all carry as women. It's a wound caused by a legacy of powerlessness that we have inherited. Every single one of us have inherited this legacy. And this was the feeling that I had in my body when I hit my own wall of powerlessness. And it was a devastating moment for me, because I was a women's and gender studies graduate student who was going to go out and change the world, and I had to finally confront what the world thought about me. So I ask, once again, what question could be so powerful that it could drive a woman with no experience to back the Appalachian Trail almost entirely by herself so that she might find the answer to that question? So here I am in graduate school in 2005, 4 classes and 1 paper away from graduating. And this was the question that I couldn't answer. Oh my God, what power do I have to change anything? What power do I have? Knowing this legacy, knowing how it's so huge, what is one woman going to do to walk out the door of this university and say, I want to create change for other women? Who was I to think I was going to take on systemic oppression of women that had been happening literally since the beginning of time? So this question is what drove me to the Appalachian Trail in 2007. I needed some time to think. I quit grad school with those 4 classes and that 1 paper left. I couldn't go another day. I had to think, because all I could see was the world painted in oppression and violence, and I couldn't figure out, where am I going to fit into this? But what I also didn't realize is who I was really searching for within myself was wild woman. Because only she has the power to stand up against a 2,400-year legacy of powerlessness that we have all inherited. There's no self-concept, there's no story, there's no opinion that you're going to have about yourself that you can say to yourself that's going to have the kind of power that wild woman will have to change this narrative. She's the only one that can take it on. So, March 12th, 2007, I go out to the Appalachian Trail. This is literally the moment I'm standing on Springer Mountain. I had a plan, as we all do. It's a great plan, I thought. I'm gonna hike every day. I'm just clear my head. I'm gonna regain my perspective. I answer my question. By the time I get to Mount Katahdin, I'll have it all figured out, and then I'm gonna travel back home and just go on with my life. Sounds like a great plan, doesn't it? Oh my gosh. I could not have been more wrong. I could not have possibly known in this moment, and I think this is a moment, I think this is the first day of hiking, what was about to transpire in my life. In order for me to reclaim wild woman within me, I had to go through a process of transformation. And anyone in this room who has said yes to that journey of transformation knows that it never goes according to plan, ever. So I started walking north, trying to figure out how to not hang my hammock on dead trees. And it wasn't even 3 months into my hike. It was June 5th, 2007. I was in Virginia. I set up my hammock after a 17-mile day, and I almost exclusively stealth camped, which means that you don't go to the shelters. I would go to the shelters, make my dinner, and then keep hiking, find an awesome place, go into the woods and camp and sleep there by myself every night. So as I was setting up camp on this particular night, I could hear this thunderstorm in the distance, and it was fast approaching, as they often are in Virginia in June. And I was changing out of my sweaty, wet, stinky hiking clothes. And the cool wind that was pushing the storm in front of me just blew over my body, my naked body at that point, and it was electrifying. And I don't know what possessed me, but something compelled me to walk away completely naked from my hammock and my tarp. And I stood on that ridge, and it really was this place. I took the picture the next morning. This is where I stood. I faced that storm that was coming towards me head on, because in that moment, something about that storm represented everything that represented powerlessness to me. And as the storm approached me, I was completely naked, my legs apart, my arms apart, my head thrown back, and I dared that storm to come and get me, because I was pissed. And as the wind started whipping around and the raindrops started pelting my naked body, I met Wild Woman for the first time. Something shifted, and this is what it felt like. I felt like her.
Awesome.
Oh yeah. I got my first glimpse of Wild Woman, and I did not fully understand what just happened at all. And for those of you, I think one of the slides I put up there, you can read about my whole hike on trailjournals.com. Search for Certain, C-E-R-T-A-I-N. Every single day I wrote in my journal. The whole journey is there. I didn't fully understand what had just happened, but something came alive in me in that moment. And it put this whole process into motion. And I also didn't realize that for Wild Woman to fully manifest in me, I was going to have to come completely undone, which is what transformation is about. You come completely undone. In fact, Mother Nature gives us that instruction quite nicely, if we learn how to pay attention to her. She says, for a seed to achieve its greatest expression, it must come completely undone. The shell cracks, its insides come out, and everything changes. For someone who doesn't understand growth, it would look like complete destruction. And it would feel like complete destruction. So growth and transformation demand that we willingly walk directly into the unknown and leave the story of who we thought we were behind us. We don't get to get a glimpse into what's waiting for us so much, although that moment with Wild Woman, that was my glimpse. But I had some work to do before she was going to come out fully. Another way of putting it, Joseph Campbell, one of my favorite authors, he said, we must be willing to let go of the life we had planned so as to have the life that is waiting for us. We have to release these stories of who we think we are in order to create the space to become who we are capable of becoming. Another way of putting this, Jack Kornfield, he said, just as snake sheds its skin, we must shed our past over and over again. So let's talk about the snake. Some of you may or may, we've all know snakes shed their skin, they molt, right? A lot of people don't know that when they're going through this process, they actually become blind because the skin, all of their skin comes off. So when they're in that very vulnerable state, they become very defensive because, prey can easily catch them. And in order to shed that skin, and if they don't, they die. But in order to shed that skin, they have to rub against rough rocks and underbrush to help try to get that old version of themselves to leave that body so they can grow into the next better version of themselves. Well, that's a great metaphor and all. And I, at one point, was so metaphorically challenged. I was like, okay, that's great, but what does this look like in real life, right? I get the snake, but what's that mean for me? So here's an example of what a great shedding looks like in a woman's life. Within 6 weeks of meeting Wild Woman for the first time on that ridge in Virginia, I was struck by lightning. I had already developed plantar fasciitis, so I had to get off the trail to get a steroid shot in the bottom of my foot if I wanted to continue hiking. My mother ended up in the ICU because of a fiddleback spider bite, and they did not know if she was going to survive. My relationship of 12 years imploded. I had to get off the trail, go home, bring that to an end, that relationship to an end. And I drove away, I was living in Michigan at the time, I drove away from Michigan with only what fit in my little pickup truck for my entire life. And I didn't even have a place to call home. I wasn't even rooted anywhere anymore. I ran out of money, and on top of all that, I found a lump in my breast. I had no health insurance and no job and no money. So when you talk about stripping and shedding, I was literally stripped of everything that supported the story of who I thought I was. No money, no home, no partner, my health was in question, my mother's life was in question, even my sense of safety in the woods during a storm had been taken away. Because I will tell you, to this day, I have a response when lightning strikes very closely. And in the moment that this was all happening, I thought, oh my God, this is like Jerry Springer. What is going on? This is not who I am. This is not my life. This is not the woman that I am. Or was it? I didn't know. I didn't know who I was anymore. And the whole thing was painful and messy, and people got hurt, and I got hurt, and it was just this, to this day, I look back at that time in my life, I'm like, whoa, God, I hope I never have to go through something like that again. I was like the blind snake, rubbing against the rocks and the underbrush, trying to release my old skin, my old story of who I thought I was. So once I got back to Virginia, I'm like, I don't know what to do. So I thought, I'm just gonna start walking north again. The only thing I know for sure, I have my pack, I know how to hike, I got this shot on my foot, I'm just gonna keep walking north. And that didn't last long. August 6, 2007, this is a picture of the moment I sat down in Shenandoah National Park, and I realized I'm no longer a hiker. a through hiker of the Appalachian Trail either. I needed to stop and be still and let the dust of my life settle and figure out what the heck was going to happen next. Nothing felt right any longer. And on top of all the stuff that had just changed in my life, the greatest shock and surprise of all happened. I fell in love. I was not looking for a new partner. It was not on my radar. Remember it said, when Wild Woman starts expressing herself through you, the rhythms of your life, creativity, your gifts, sexuality, all of it starts falling into a flow. I wasn't looking, but it happened nonetheless. So I was like, okay, I'm getting off the trail. I told myself, it's time to grow up and just settle down. Stop traipsing around the woods, acting like you're some hiker. Whatever that was about, it's done. I needed to just stop and be a responsible adult. Well, there was one problem with this plan. Wild Woman wasn't going to let me off the hook. She was not going to allow me to end my adventure and just go back to try to recreate just another version of my old story of who I thought I was. And my partner, Karen, you all heard us play music last night, she saw the restlessness in me and the pain that I felt by trying to lock Wild Woman away again. I got this temp job as an accounts payable clerk. I highlighted and I filed all day long. That was my job. And I intentionally used the wrong color highlighter sometimes. So because of the support of Karen, she said, look, you gotta go. You gotta go. I don't know if I would have brought this up on my own. So she was right. So on April 14th of 2008, I got back onto the Appalachian Trail right where I left off. With her support, emotional, financial, I started walking north again. And this time, my external life, thank God, stayed stable. But my internal life still stayed in a state of chaos. I still hadn't answered my question. What power do I have to change anything? And I had the privilege of spending 6 months doing what most people do in 3 months on the Appalachian Trail. I started in Front Royal. Was that where I started? I think. Virginia. That's on the northern edge of Shenandoah National Park. This last stretch that I did, I had people who started in Georgia that year catch up and pass me. Very proud of that. In this time, though, while I was out there again, I became more and more deeply connected to Wild Woman and was learning how to trust her guidance. But October 8th, 2008 comes along. I find myself standing on top of Mount Katahdin. I'd finished all 2,200 miles of the Appalachian Trail, but I was both more lost than I had ever been in my life. And at the same time, I had begun accepting the truth of this statement because Wild Woman had shown me this. And I bet if you all go somewhere where you don't feel vulnerable and exposed, and you sit there and read this, you'll realize this just might be a fear that you have too. Our deepest fear is not that we are inadequate or powerless. Our deepest fear is that we are powerful beyond measure. So I had to kind of start owning up to this one, which meant no more excuses, no more I can't, because Wild Woman had shown this to me, and I can't argue with my own experience. Can't do it. I mean, we could try. Then we're just lying to ourselves. So I ended up going back, home, finished the degree. I did finish my master's degree.
Yay.
Yeah. Took me a while, and I actually got to write my thesis on the Appalachian Trail hiking culture. So, wouldn't have happened had I not actually quit school. And see how these things kind of work? Yeah, it's kind of cool. Ended up working as an advocate for survivors of sexual violence and thought I found my lifetime job. The most amazing job I've ever had working for somebody else other than what I do right now, which is I own my own business now. I do what I want to do on my own terms. And it was devastating because I was a few years into this job. I was accomplishing things in my community that nobody in the 30-year history of this agency had been able to accomplish. And they brought in a new executive director. We were kind of like mixing oil and water. She was younger than me, which shouldn't be an issue. I don't care. But she was in over her head. And she knew I knew that. So it became a pretty big power struggle. And while I was away at a training conference in Florida, we had a little disagreement on the phone. And when I got back to my room that night, I found an email where she fired me from my job. And I was devastated in that moment because I thought, this was it. You know, this was what I was going to do for the rest of my life. Ended up going to the state level, working in a cubicle again, driving away from the mountains every day. Beige cubicle land for me didn't work. I was disconnected from the very people that I felt like my gifts could affect the most. And so in 2013, with the blessings of, again, my partner, I quit that job and decided to branch out and start my own business and put my own vision into this world, which, by the way, the seeds for this vision were planted while I was hiking the Appalachian Trail. And all of these years since I finished my hike, Wild Woman has not stopped talking to me. She keeps pulling me back into the wilderness to keep teaching me lessons. I have fasted for 4 days and 4 nights in the Mojave Desert, drinking only 1 gallon of water per day. And that little orange arrow that you see, that's pointing to my sleeping bag. I have slept completely exposed in a 95,000-acre wildlife preserve, ironically named Wind Wolves. And what you can't see in this picture is that I am surrounded as far as the eye can see by holes in the ground that look like that. Who cares? It's just a hole in the ground, right? There's a lot of them. Until I discovered the occupants of those holes. Tell me about it.
Where was it good?
It's a place called Wind Wolves Preserve. It's in California. Yeah, don't worry. They're not around here. But wouldn't you know it, Wild Woman, because when I found this place that I was going to sleep that night, this was a completely intuitive walk. So those of you who were in my workshop today, you know how you did that allurement walk? It's just follow your heart and go wherever your heart tells you. That's what this was about. I didn't have a plan to stay up on this hill. So I get to the bottom of the hill and I ran into this beauty, and everything in my body wanted to turn around and bolt. Because out of all of the animals on this earth, the only one that I struggle with are spiders. We had a long conversation. I asked for permission, can I please climb your hill here and sleep on top? She didn't budge. I got these great pictures. I'm like, okay, thinking that this was just an isolated little spider down at the bottom, and I'd be totally safe up at the top. I climb up the hill, and then all those holes were everywhere. We've since worked our way into a much more healthy relationship. A Wild Woman led me into the woods for a week with nothing but a water bottle and a knife, where I survived because of the good graces of Mother Earth. That's called a debris hut. This was in October in Virginia when the temperatures get pretty chilly at night. I have stood in the middle of the Virginia wilderness alone, holding a dead bird in my hand, a bird whom I had just witnessed being killed by an owl. Why that owl dropped that bird for me to find it, who knows, but it did. And when I went and I scooped this little yellow-bellied sapsucker woodpecker up in my hands, it made me question the validity of my very existence. Because I thought to myself, if I had not been out here to witness its life and its death, whoever would have cared that it was alive? And the next thing I knew, I was asking that question about myself. It was in this place near Matts Creek, at the Appalachian Trail again. It was 5 years after I completed the AT that I felt compelled to go back to this area, and I didn't know why. And I ended up hiking, the James River footbridge, going across the footbridge, going south, and just intuitively went off trail, started bushwhacking, and then there was this like amazing little campsite. And I stayed there for a week by myself, and that's when this all happened. And it was in this place that I was finally brought to the end of myself. In such a deep and profound way that I spent the next 3 months in bed simply trying to convince myself that my life is worth living. And yes, I flirted with ending my life. It was all of these moments that Wild Woman was there whispering her wisdom into my ears. So I want to end this evening sharing that wisdom with each of you. And I want to be really clear about where this is coming from, because when I sat down and this is what came out, I wasn't thinking, oh, I have to send this certain message. This is just what came out in the moment from Wild Woman. So here's what she has to say to each of you. My sisters, it is time. It is time for you to break out of the prison of your own self-limiting beliefs. It is time for you to fully accept that you are not powerless. It is time for you to express your gifts and let this world fully see the magnificent creature that you are. It's time to walk away from anyone, anything, or any situation that would try to tell you that you are lesser than, that you are inadequate, or that you are not worthy. Because nothing could be further from the truth. It is time for you to molt, to shed your skin and let go of what no longer serves you so that you can be free to express Wild Woman who lives in you, and you, and you, and you. This world, Mother Earth, humanity, needs you. Not her, you, and me. We all need your power and your gifts, whatever they are. So here's the deal. We are really bad as women about minimizing what it is we have to offer to others. So let me give you a little perspective. In the history of the universe, meaning since the beginning of the existence of whatever this all is that's going on in our lives, right? There has never been, and there will never be, another woman like you. Ever. So what you have to offer and contribute is not only unique, but it is sacred. It is sacred. It's time to stop making excuses. It's time to stop saying, I can't, and to start saying, I just did. It's time to stand on your own two powerful feet and walk directly into the fires of your worst fears. And you can trust the words from a woman who has done that time and time again in her life, and I still continue doing that to this day. Doing this because the only way to take back the power that you have lost from the deepest wounds that you have suffered in your life is to confront those dragons head on and be willing to feel the pain of those wounds directly. Because only then, and only then, will you realize bodily that even feeling the deepest pain you've ever felt in your life is still not powerful enough to annihilate the wild woman inside of you. She really can't be touched. It's time to stop numbing yourself, because when you do this, you also numb the wild woman. It's time to reach out and ask for help and support that you will undoubtedly need as you navigate your own heroic journey of transformation. It's time to rage and cry and throw a temper tantrum, to make love to yourself and welcome every emotion you are capable of feeling. That's what it's called, to be a full and whole human being. You owe this to yourselves. You owe this to the wild woman inside of you who so desperately wants to be set free completely. And you owe this to your daughters and your granddaughters. Because if we ever hope to rid ourselves of this legacy of powerlessness that we've all inherited, it's going to require some generation of women to find the courage to say, enough. Enough. Just as our grandmothers did in the 20s, and great-grandmothers when they got us the right to vote, just as the women did in the 60s and 70s when they started saying, look, we are more than cleaning the house. We have gifts to offer to this world. So we've had wild women. We also have inherited that legacy as well. And if the very thought of doing any of this terrifies you, then good. Because there's your first opportunity to feel that terror and learn how to harness that energy so that you can keep scraping up against those rocks and the underbrush so that you can shed all of that shit that keeps you from seeing the divine, feminine woman that exists in your core. So I, the wild woman within me, demands, doesn't ask, doesn't say, go home and think about it. She's demanding that you start asking yourself this question every single morning when you get up from this moment on. Am I going to live my life according to that old bullshit story of powerlessness that does not serve me or anybody else? Or am I going to give voice to the wild and powerful woman that I truly am? Thank you.